Hello YouTube, this is Boston Best 0407, and in this video I'm going to discuss the gender pay gap. And the gender pay gap is a very important issue for feminist politics and gender politics. It's really the catalyst. It's the single biggest tool to silence any sort of you know opposition to feminism or to feminist legislation or what have you. Because anytime, if you're, for example, a men's rights activist or something, anytime you bring up you bring up men's issues, they'll always shoot you down with, oh well, you still get paid so and so amount on the dollar. And so it's always used to silence any sort of rational debate about men's issues, ironically. And it's an interesting subject because it's also very complex and nuanced, but it's controversial. And however, I think the way it's discussed, or rather, I think really the way it's debunked, rather, I think is flawed. You have two sides of it. One who believes that it exists and believes that it's patriarchal discrimination against women. Or sometimes it's even worded as capitalist patriarchal discrimination against women. But you also have the other side, which attempts to use a free market analyst to debunk this and to say, well, there's no pay gap. It's just personal choice. Now, obviously, the feminist view is complete bunk. However, I also believe the free market view is not per se wrong, but still bunk, basically. And the reason I think this is for two main reasons. One, I don't believe in free markets. I'm not really a big believer in free market economics. I don't, because it's too optimistic for me. I'm not bought into all of the promises. To me, it's the same type. It's the same type of liberalism, pretty much. It's just like modern progressive liberalism. It's just the conservative form of liberalism. It's liberalism for conservatives, and it's flawed, and it's hard to understand really social dynamics and way societies work from that perspective. It presumes everybody is homo economicus, that everybody's rational, which they're not, and so there's deep flaws with the way free market economists and analysts look at the world. Now, the second thing I have to say is that unlike them, who either don't believe there's a gender pay gap or believe the gender pay gap is flawed, or that's not really the full case, there's something else, it's choices, it's women's choices. I believe that there is a gender pay gap. I believe the gender pay gap exists, but I believe there are very good reasons for it. And it doesn't actually conflict with my other observation or even accusation, depending on your perspective, that the female is privileged. On the contrary, I believe in a capitalist economy, she's actually very privileged, far privileged above the man in terms of employability, or theoretically anyway. Not always. I'm not going to say with concrete certainty, but theoretically anyway, she would be favored over her male counterparts. And this is precisely because the female is a cheaper labor force. Now, I think it was somebody. It was one men's rights activist I saw on the computer before I was even interested in men's issues. Then I think it was Warren Farrell who debunked this, or rather that said that there can't possibly be a gender pay gap because I'll just hire all women. I'll start a firm and hire all women. And I can make cheap products, and there must be something wrong with this. For example, one guy said that, well, you wouldn't outsource overseas if you could just pay women. All of those, I think, are very simplistic analysis, very simplistic views on the subject, and it got me stimulating because at the time I was still pretty well versed in left wing thinking. And so part of my analysis is admittedly, it's vaguely Marxian. I'm not gonna lie. I'm by now at this point in my life one of the most conservative people you ever meet. I'm literally the most conservative person you ever meet, probably. But I still think this analysis is correct. And so if you're of that persuasion, that is, if you are conservative and you get cynical about this and you don't like my analysis, just bear with me. Try to think with an open mind on it. Try to think a little differently on the topic. Now, to begin with, long before we ever had an industrial economy, we males and females had a division of labor. We created a division of labor which was really based on common sense. It was based on biological differences, but also based on common sense, and they were complementary, and they worked together to help build a tribe and help to build a family, a small division within a tribe, and it worked, and it made sense because if, for example, the female has the burden of childbirth. If she has the burden of having to carry a child to term, if she's going to be out of commission for 9 months out of the year, then it makes sense that the one who sired her would have the economic responsibility of taking care of her, of providing for her, of providing resources for her, of providing a place to live for her. And this creation, which is the basis of the family, basis of the small family unit within the tribe, worked, and it was, I personally believe it was an entirely fair arrangement. But as culture evolved, as the agrarian society evolved, two things happened. One, it became the social standard. It became a given within the culture, within every culture. It was not something abstract. It was not something individualistic or whatever. No, it was the social standard of the agrarian society. Second, it ensured that at no point would women ever be destitute, taking care of the children on their own. And for the most part, there were not situations where they really were destitute, unless under very specific situations. And there were both benefits in that arrangement for males and females. Males had the opportunity to create their own lineage, the patrilineal, the being the heads of the families and things like that. They had benefit from that, and that was in exchange for their role in economics, in providing and in running the property and things like that nature. And the female had the other role of the bearing the child, and it was based on what they presumed to be natural distinctions. Women being more motherly, men being more aggressive, whatever. It was a situation that worked. Not always to the best, not always perfectly, but it worked out. Now, when you take that social standard and that culture of distinctions and differences, and you're transitioning into an industrial economy, because one of the things you have to understand about the agrarian society is that it evolved out of the soil, literally, and the conception of the world was out of the soil, and it was organic, and it was hierarchical, and it was based on distinctions. And presumably it did not recognize a market economy. There was no concept of the market as such. The market, on the contrary, developed on the side, within, and in certain areas of the economy. There were probably even areas where the market didn't even touch the surface of their consciousness. The market was also a physical place. It was a place you went. It was a place you traded. There wasn't a market in the way we think of it today. It was a organic, agrarian, traditional society. When we talk about traditionalism, that's what we're referring to. We're referring to a conception of the desire to preserve traditional values of a pre-industrial society, more or less. And that's what effectively existed. Now, when you consider that transitioning into an industrial economy, what does that mean? Well, when you look at it, you realize that as time went on, the agrarian economy was not working to the same degree. It was probably beginning maybe around 1500 or so, thereabouts in the West, and also probably at different places in other countries. But the merchant classes, which had always been there in the agrarian society, they were in there. They were the bourgeoisie, they were the intelligentsia, they were the class of merchants and traders and artisans and people like that. These people were on the side. They did not have official status. They did not have legal rights. They did not have a government that looked after their interests. And as they became much wealthier, during the end of the Middle Ages. They began to ally themselves with with the established government. The established government, it has to be understood. I should probably reverse that. The established government began to ally itself with the merchant class, the aristocracy, and they built a relationship which became mercantilism, and that led to colonialism and protectionism and many other things like that. But the state, for the first time, became allied with the merchant class, began to recognize them. But as the agrarian economy, as the old traditional feudalistic order of things began to not work out so much, and as it became that it was coming to its end, and the merchant class was becoming wealthier, this was beginning not to work out, that its old structures were just did not work with the developing industrial economy. They got rid of it. This was done through revolutions and done through the reversing of aristocratic privileges and the buying up of property and what Marxists, those evil Marxists, referred to as primitive accumulation, what Marx referred to as primitive accumulation, and what some Marxists, or rather the Marxist David Harvey, referred to as accumulation by dispossession. That was just really, it's just a Marxian term for the process of transitioning from a agrarian economy to a market industrial based economy, and this is where our modern conception of economics and what have you came from. It meant basically that areas where the market never touched, where the market never penetrated the consciousness of people, it became everything. And overnight, the market gradually began to conquer everyone, began to be absorbed into the market. And so within this transition from an agrarian to an industrial economy, the traditional hierarchical distinction that had been made would affect the way in which people moving into that economy would be perceived, or would be perceived as wage laborers. And so the cap, and this is particularly as it would relate to biology. So within that traditional social arrangement, with men economic responsibility, females domestic responsibility, men would be the ones still expected to go out and earn a living. And initially, that became the social standard within the capitalist economy. And so when you have an economy full of male wage laborers, one thing becomes clear: if you're a capitalist bringing these people into the labor economy and you have to pay them and you're looking for laborers, you have to be able to provide them enough money to be able not just to take care of themselves, but also to take care of their families. And that social standard that had existed before continued to exist. And so the sense of traditional gender and family relationships continued to exist, even though part of its economic base was gone. It did not exist anymore. It was a factory industrial based economy that now existed. But this meant that men got paid more. It meant that men would get paid more in that economy, or rather, they would be getting they would have the primary. They'd receive most of the income. They'd be collecting the income. Now, females, on the other hand, did not have responsibilities as it relates to outside the home, but they've always had their own forms of work unique to their own gender. And so when the economy is going from, say, an artisan, where artisan based, it's small scale, it's artisans using their technique, their hands, things like that, to build various commodities and products and things like that. Well, not that they would be called commodities and products, but it would be under the old market economy, under the old way of doing things, which Marxists referred to as simple exchange or simple commodity production. Under a situation like that, where now you're transitioning into a manufacturing economy. You go from having that to having to produce a lot more at a higher rate. You have to produce a lot more. You have to get a lot more out there into the market. You have to essentially flood the market with But this meant that, for example, various areas that were had where women could express their skill, they were brought into a factory. And so many of the first, from my understanding anyway, and you can correct me on this, some of the first areas where women were employed were areas like the garment industry and things of that nature. This was where unique to their gender, but now they were working not in an area where they were expressing their unique abilities at creating the products. They were now part of a labor force. So that was that. And so they started to receive an income at this point. But given like as what I had established, if males have the social standard, the cultural and social standard, the macro standard, if you will, of being the breadwinners, the heads of the home, and so on and so forth. If that traditional social structure between men and women continued to exist in an industrial economy, and that affected wage rates, it meant effectively that males would be getting paid more, and females would not be getting paid as much. It also meant that children probably won't get as much pay as adults, and so on and so forth, as they were brought into the economy. It would change the capitalist perception of who they would pay. But of course, being capitalist and being needing to push down, having the tendency, not necessarily even the conscious desire, but the tendency to want to push down wage rates, to want to cheapen the rate at which they have to pay their laborers. This traditional family arrangement, the family arrangement that so many conservatives go on about, consider sacred, and which I have a great deal of sympathy for, mind you, was an arrangement that would be a tank on the economy. It was not something that would be sustainable. No traditional social arrangements are sustainable in a capitalist economy. That has to be understood. But these traditional arrangements would not be sustainable because there would be a genuine need it would become too costly to employ males. So they began to employ females. Now they didn't, like I said, they weren't employing females in areas necessarily that were uniquely male. They still have to have males around somewhat, but they started to employ females a little more. So much so that the arrangements between the working classes, and this led to the labor movements and to the rise of socialism and communist ideals among the working class of that 19th century era. It also led to bourgeois feminism. It led to, I'll use that term, bourgeois feminism. It led to the very first feminists, who were all conservative, middle-class women. They were women whose husbands were industrialists. They were upper to middle-class women, and they were bored, and they wanted to have jobs themselves, but they also wanted to push women into the workforce. They wanted women to have equal rights and to work alongside men. This was a part of the culture, the increased desire for equality and liberty and that kind of thing. So it was a building on the established revolutions of America and France. So that was that. But that was created a mechanism in which women would be pushed out into the workforce, where there became a need to want to put women out in the workforce. But why would you want to employ women over men? Well, because women are quite simply a cheaper labor force. They're much cheaper to employ, and it could be debated. I mean, people say psychologically speaking, they're much more susceptible. They're more submissive. I'm not going to go into that. I'm not even going to say that that's true. Actually, I think it's probably the case, for example, that like I think Aaron Peasy pointed out in a Man-Woman Myth video, where men are mavericks and men are loyal to their families, whereas females will be loyal to the company. That could be debated. I think it has a level of truth to it, but that probably could be debated, or there's some nuance there. I'm not going to go into that. I'm just going to look at it from a strictly economic standpoint. If you're a capitalist, you're going to want to employ a female, and this is what's led to the real purse. And this is also why, ironically enough, you find wealthy capitalists even today. You hear people saying like women should rule the world. Wealthy, powerful men saying women should rule the world. This push for women to be in all areas of life. But it's a unique situation because, see, whereas capitalism has the instinct to want to push down wage rates, to push down wage rates. It still needs to have another situation in which the labor force can buy back the products they create. And this has been one of the big things. And the thing that is unique about the female is that women are that workforce. They are a workforce you can pay less. You can have the excuse of paying them less, but because the social standard continues to exist that they're being subsidized, thus a redistribution of wealth would have to occur. And this process of redistributing wealth has occurred. It has occurred within for example, the divorce industry, the courts, alimony, all these different things. They redistribute the wealth of men. Men create wealth. They give it to women. Women buy more, and it's a perfect capitalist situation. It's a fundamentally perfect situation for a capitalist, and you'll find that the corporations have done very well because of this. And so that's what I believe. But the thing is, as women move up in the economy, as women make up a large amount of the labor force, this wage gap, and as they develop better educations, this wage gap is beginning to shrink. I believe the wage gap is beginning to shrink. But the thing that has to be understood is that the reason why it occurs is because they are the perfect employee. Not always that it's always perfect, but having women in the workforce and as a consumer base is perfect. You don't have to pay them as much, but they still consume because they're the only segment of the population that has a right to be subsidized. Women are the only segment of the population that has the right to be subsidized, besides children. Excuse me. But that's my take on the gender pay gap, and it's a different. I guess it's a different way of looking at the issue than probably what most people will look at. I don't claim that what I have stated here is perfect, and I'm sure conservatives will be very mad at me. I'm sure I probably just discredit my own so-called, any conservative credibility I might have for referencing Marx and Marxist. But I believe that economic perspective is correct, and I believe what I've stated sounds pretty reasonable. It sounds pretty reasonable to me anyway. But anyway, that's all I gotta say, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.